right, I believe you can all hear me. I tend to move around, so if I move around from the mic and you can't hear me, just give me a wave. All right, so first of all, thank you for the nice introduction. Is that maybe better? Thanks for the nice introduction and thanks for the opportunity to be here and be part of your program of this 5-Ed Expo. All right, so I was asked to speak to you a little bit about the traits of the modern genetics, what the potential of those animals are, and then also look at some key factors to focus on to achieve that genetic potential. So just bear in mind that the information that I share with you today is based on our genetics on specific farms. It doesn't mean that it could be 100% replicated on other farms due to changes in circumstances from farm to farm. Right, so what I would like to touch on today, first to give you an overview of Topics Oudtshoorn as a company, then look at how we approach breeding of the modern genetics. Then I'll introduce you quickly to our products in the market, then look at some of the genetic trends and performance that we see on farm in the last couple of years. And last, look on some key factors that you need to focus on to ensure that you achieve the genetic potential of these animals. All right, so first of all, I'll focus on Topics Oudtshoorn as a global company. It's a leader in swine genetics. It's the world's most innovative swine genetics company. In the world, we've got quite a large footprint. We operate in 55 countries worldwide. We have a very substantial research and development budget of 30 million euros for a year. 15.1 million doses of semen is produced on an annual basis, and 2.5 million crossbred finishes, gilts is sold per year. And 165 million pigs sold on an annual basis contain some sort of Topics genetics, whether it is only from the female side or from the terminal side of the side as well. And then what we do see, even though the pig industry has been going through a number of challenges over the past few years, we still see a steady growth and demand for our genetics on a global basis. All right, now Topics Oudtshoorn celebrated in 2020 100 years of genetic progress. Even though the company as we know it today, Topics Oudtshoorn, was only established in 2014 through the merger of the Dutch company Topics and the Norwegian company Oudtshoorn. Looking at the histories of those companies separately, it goes back 100 years already. And over that period, there's been a lot of new technologies and advancements in things in the breeding program that has led to genetic progress over the past year. Really, and it was also said earlier this morning, over the last 30 years, we have really seen an improvement and a speed up of the genetic progress. And I think when we look at what we can expect in the next year, years to come, that will be accelerated even further. All right, so as a genetic company, we have some core values, that is being inventive, looking for new ways to measure traits, new traits to measure, new things to incorporate into our breeding program to accelerate genetic progress. We have to be responsible in terms of what we do and how we do it from a breeding point of view. We have to stay committed to our goals, but also to our customers. And then also we are performance driven, always wanting to give our customers an added benefit year on year in terms of production. And what we aim to do is to be the best and the fastest in translating the needs of our customers into a genetic product and solution so that they can see the effect of what the product can offer on farm. All right, so that's a very quick overview of Topics Oudtshoorn International. I'm from Topics Oudtshoorn South Africa. We are a distributor of Topics Oudtshoorn genetics in Africa and mostly operating within South Africa. Now, as Topics Oudtshoorn South Africa, we also have already a long history in the country. The company was established in 1995 by pig breeders who had a need for good genetics. So they imported genetics from, which was at that stage known as Daland. But over that period, also years to come, other commercial farmers had the same need for that improved genetics. So the company was restructured so that they can also do sales to other commercial farmers. And then in the past, I think it's 28 years now, there's been a lot of developments with new farms to expand the capacity for F1 production. We also have done a lot of expansions on our breeding program to ensure that the topics Oudtshoorn genetics that we provide locally is on par with what is available internationally. And currently, as we stand here today, we are again busy with the development of a new farm down in the Warden region. All right, so we are based as our head office in Pretoria, from where we serve customers over the entire South Africa, but then we also have select partners in countries in Africa, of which we also have some customers in Zimbabwe itself. Give you an idea of our footprint in South Africa and where we operate from and where we do the breeding. First of all, we have our business unit in Mpumalanga, where we have our main nucleus breeding farm of 1,500 sows. So when we talk about the local breeding program, this is where the local breeding program is being implemented and where we make our genetic progress. Then we also produce on that nucleus farm a number of TN70 parent sows. We have a gilt rearing unit where those animals are sent off to by the age of 10 weeks, and those animals are then reared and selected for customer sales. Then we also have a boar station on that farm for 78 boars, from which we collect semen for both ourselves and the commercial market. And then all the TN70 boars which is produced, which is basically our genetic byproduct, is sent to our own growing farm where they are grown out and sold as baconers. Then our second business unit is in Gauteng. On this farm we have 3 sow units. 2 of the sow units are mainly for production of TN70s. Then we also converted one of our previous nucleus farms into a new research farm. That farm is stocked with TN70 sows where we basically farm them commercially, and I'll speak a bit later about our CCPS program, but this farm links in with that program. Then also on this farm we have a boar station. There's capacity for 122 boars, but we only keep around about 100 boars at any stage, so there's some additional capacity should the market demand for semen grow. And again, byproducts are sent to Dorsfontein Growing Farm. All right, so apart from TN70s, which we provide to the market, we also provide fresh semen to our customers. The semen is processed at our central AI laboratory situated in Pretoria. So what happens, boars are collected on both of the 2 boar stations in the 2 business units. They do a 1-to-1 dilution on the semen to stabilize the ejaculates. That is then sent to Pretoria to the central lab. Here we use computer-assisted semen analysis to evaluate the quality of the ejaculates. If it passes the standard for use, we will determine how many doses can be produced from that ejaculate, and we will do a final dilution using automated dispensing systems. And then we have a GTB 1000 packaging machine where we pack the semen in the sachets, which is then cooled down to 17 degrees, and we dispatch that twice per week across the entire South Africa through transport routes, which we also manage ourselves. And on an annual basis, our lab produces around about 240,000 doses for customer use. All right, now being on the top of the biosecurity pyramid, supplying genetics to our customers, it is critical that we manage our health through biosecurity. So since the inception of the company, the farms have been specific pathogen-free. You can see a list of some of the diseases which we test for. To ensure that we maintain this status, we do routine health monitoring testing on the animals. Then also we have, all of our units are compartmentalized. So we have very strict rules in terms of what can enter, who can enter. Any personnel, any visitors entering the unit have to be 72-hour pig-free and also cloven hoof animal-free. Then no vehicles actually enter our units, but the transport of pigs, the vehicles doing transport of pigs as well as delivery of feed has a strict protocol of being washed and disinfected before they can proceed to the units. And then we have some additional measures for biosecurity. So this would be typically what the unit looks like when you reach Rietfontein Nucleus, which is our main breeding unit. This is the dry change. So any visitor, personnel, vehicle driver that gets to this farm has to go through this first barrier for biosecurity. All personal items, clothing, underwear, everything is left behind, change into supplied clothing, and from there you can then either proceed to whether you work on the farm, deliver the feed, transport animals or then proceed to the unit. If people go into the unit, they then go through a physical shower process. Again, everything is left behind. Go through the shower, head to toe, everything is washed, and you put on supplied clothes inside the unit. Then you are ready to go into the unit. So then any vehicles entering this farm has to be washed and disinfected, and also we do a cab cleaning of those vehicles. All right, now apart from ensuring that our health is managed well on farm, when we send animals to customers, we also have to ensure that that is done in a proper and safe way. So for that purpose, we make use of our pig truck, or rig as we call it, and this is an environmentally controlled truck. So what this truck has, there's a ventilation system which is monitored through a wireless device from the cab. Then all air coming into this truck is filtered through HEPA filters and go through UV lights. Then there's onboard washing facilities and disinfection. So once the truck has delivered animals to a farm, we need a supply of water. That truck can then be washed down, and on the way back to the farm, we can do spray and heat disinfection of the truck. Then, apart from the biosecurity advantages of this truck, there's also some welfare benefits. The truck has 3 decks with 4 pens per deck, which allows us to group animals in smaller groups. Also, when we have differences in ages, we can have a smaller age variation within a specific group. Once the truck is closed, it's completely dark inside, so the animals really calm down and settle down nicely for the trips. And then also, there's ample ventilation. We've got onboard heating for the cold winter loads, and then for very long haul loads, we also have a water tank with nipples where we can supply water to the animals if needed. All right, so that just gives you a quick overview of what we've got on farm, how we, what units we have. Now I'd like to just discuss a little bit the breeding and what we look at for breeding. Oh God, thanks, Andrew. What we look at, what traits we look at when it comes to breeding. So first of all, I think it's important just to understand Topics Norsvin's view on breeding. So we have a balanced breeding approach. This means we don't focus just on a few production parameters and really focus to improve that over time. We take production and profitability into account, but we also look at the effect of what we do and what our breeding does on pigs, planet, and people. So taking a more sustainability approach with profitability. So when we look at the different traits that we include into our breeding goals, I'm going to split it up into profitability traits and sustainability traits. So first of all, one of our goals is to increase profitability. So how do we increase profitability? One, we have to increase the output. So the number of pigs that we produce, but also the value of those pigs. And second, we have to reduce the cost. So first of all, the output and value drivers. How do we increase the number of pigs that we can supply? That is all linked to pigs sold per sow per year. So we need more live-born piglets, and we need those piglets to survive up to the point of slaughter so that we can get a value for those pigs. Then we also need to maximize the carcass, the weight, that is being done by higher growth rates, achieving higher carcasses, and then also carcass yield plays a role here, so that the value per animal slaughtered is maximized. Now, when we look at cost reduction, I think we can all agree that feed is probably it is the biggest input cost into any piggery. So by reducing the feed costs, we can reduce our overall costs. And here the focus really is on feed conversion, or rather cost per kilogram gain, because there's different types of rations you can feed, which has different prices that results in different feed conversions, but cost per kilogram gain is really something that tells you whether you are moving in the right or wrong direction. Then health and survival is also important. If you have healthy pigs, you need less medication to treat those pigs, which is also a reduction in cost. And survival is really important. Any pig that is lost through any stage of production, whether it is a pregnant sow, whether it is a weaner pig, or it is a grower pig, that pig has already been invested in terms of time, feed, and you don't get any value out of pigs. So if we can reduce or increase the survival of pigs, we can reduce the cost or potential losses in our system. And then also reduction of labor. If you have pigs which are relatively easy to manage and you need less intervention from people, that also relates to less people needed to manage that farm and a lower cost in general. All right, then there are also sustainability traits. So many of these traits will also have an effect on profitability in the end, but it is not a direct cost necessarily. So I won't go through all of them, but no one pays you extra if you have a higher birth weight or a higher weaning weight if you're selling carcasses in the end. But for you as a producer, having a pig with a higher birth weight, that is an indication of lifetime performance, so higher birth weight has a better or has impact on your production. A pig that is heavier at weaning is a pig that starts the weaner phase better, it just adapts better. Also, heavier piglets need less or lower cost weaner diets to manage them. Congenital defects, pigs that are born with congenital defects tend to not survive very long after birth. So we focus on selecting against congenital defects so that we can maximize the number of live-born piglets that can be taken through to slaughter. Already mentioned survival rates as well. Then the number of teats is really important. Again, as part of our balanced breeding approach, we believe that every piglet that is born extra, because we are selecting for increased litter sizes, also needs to have a teat to be suckled from. If you don't have sufficient teats for the litter sizes that you have, it will mean that you will need supplementary feeding of milk products, which again has a cost to it. Sow retention is really important, so we look at different traits, which is important for that sow to maintain in the herd and at least give you good 7 parities. If you lose a sow within the first 2 or 3 parities, she really hasn't paid you back fully for the cost that you have to replace her, and additional losses, whether it is losses due to poor reproduction or losses due to death or losses due to conformation issues, leg issues, there's an additional cost to replace that animal again. And then social behavior is also important. We tend to keep animals in groups, whether it be sows or grower pigs. If we have negative behavior towards one another, that can also negatively influence your production. So when we approach our breeding goals, we really have to find a balance between the production or profitability traits and the sustainability traits. Just to explain to you how the different traits are organized within our breeding program, we have 5 different platforms: feed and feed efficiency, female and male reproduction, meat and carcass quality, health and behavior or animal welfare, and then also genetics and genomics. Within each of these platforms, we have specialists specifically looking at traits and aspects within that platform, which is then potentially incorporated into our breeding program. Now, what is important to know is any trait that is included in our breeding program is not just because we can simply measure it and we'd like to include it. It has to actually add value to our program, and that is all based on data. So if we decide to implement a new trait into our breeding, it has to be measurable, it has to be heritable, and it has to actually add value to the system. All right, so to explain to you just the global and local breeding structure. So for the products that we have in South Africa, there are basically 3 pure lines which come in play. We have 2 maternal lines, the Z line and the L line, and then we have the terminal sire line, which is the T and Tempo. So globally, we have 2 breeding hubs where our genetic nucleus populations are located. For the Z line and the T and Tempo, that is situated in Canada, and then for the L line, that is situated in Norway. Now, some of the best boars of those 2 genetic nucleus structures is then sent to the Netherlands, and in South Africa, we also have a local breeding population of these different pure lines, and we import frozen semen from the Netherlands. So we are linked directly to these 2 genetic hubs through the importation of frozen semen. Now, you might ask, why is it important that we also run a local breeding program if we can import genetics directly from these populations? And for that, I just want to explain to you, first of all, the values that we use for selection and how data comes into play with that. So we use, for any breeding decision, we make use of the topic selection index. topic selection index is calculated differently for each of the lines. It takes into consideration the traits which are important for that specific line, and then it gives you an indication for each of those traits of the value of that animal relative to the population. So instead of you having to look at 20 different underlying breeding values for 20 different traits and decide which one to select or not, we get one compilation value which we then use for selection. What is important with this is that any animal which has a pedigree will have a breeding value. But the more information we can gather for the animal itself, the higher the accuracy and reliability of that breeding value will become. So for this purpose, we have set up also a local breeding program where we collect data on our local animals, which then boosts the accuracy of our TSIs and makes it more reliable to select our local animals on these values. Right, so when we look at genetic progress within our system, as I've mentioned, we import frozen semen from some of the best boars in the genetic nucleus system, and anywhere between 60 and 100% are pure line insemination. So this is the inseminations we do to produce replacement animals for our own pure line herds, is done with frozen semen. And this is really a big driver of genetic progress. This also creates the genetic link between the two populations, the genetic nucleus and the local population. And for us to be able to evaluate the genetic value of our population, we need to have that genetic link. So the frozen semen usage is dual purpose, but mostly it drives genetic progress. Then our local breeding program, we also collect data on our local populations, include a number of data collection protocols. We collect reproduction data on about 7,400 sows that include both pure lines and crossbred animals, and I'll explain again when I come to CCPS how the crossbred animals fit in. Then every piglet which is born on our nucleus farm is weighed at birth, and any movement of that piglet to a foster sow or any mortality is recorded. So this gives us information on the ability of the sows to produce litters, on the variation within a litter in terms of birth weight, the actual birth weights, and also the survival of pigs in the different litters. Then we also do performance testing, again on purebred and crossbred animals. The performance testing is basically following the animals through the grower period between 10 and 22 weeks of age. Here we look at the growth rates of the animals, and at the end of this phase we also measure the loin depth and back fat with live muscle scanning. So that gives an indication of the quality of the carcass which we get from that animal. With that performance testing, we also do on our research farm individual feed intake registration. That is on the right, you can see the picture of an animal in that feeding station where we have an animal scale as well as a scale for the feed. So it gives us individual values for feed intake and growth per animal. So we have individual feed conversion values for the animals in this system. Then we have CCPS. So CCPS stands for Combined Crossbred and Purebred Selection. So I've mentioned a number of times that we collect data also on crossbred animals. The reason why we do that, first of all, you have to note that the animals included in this program, all the commercial animals, are fully pedigreed. We know exactly who the dam and the sire is, and we can link those animals back to the pure line animals in our nucleus herds. So we then collect reproduction data on those animals as well as finishing data on that animals. That information is linked back to the pure line animals, and why we do this is that we have an indication of which pure line animals we must select to give us the best crossbred performance. Because ultimately we work with pure lines in our nucleus herds, but what really matters is the commercial level where we sell commercial animals, crossbred animals, to commercial farms. So we don't just want a purebred animal that performs well, we want an animal that gives offspring which perform well on commercial level. And then last but not least, and probably our most important focus, is genotyping. We're currently in the process of expanding our genomics footprint in our herds. So here we also have, apart from just selecting animals on a phenotypic level, we also have genomic information. So really looking at what the genes for specific traits of an animal is, and that allows us to on a genetic level. All right, so then it comes to our products. I've already mentioned them quickly earlier on, but we have two products. Our maternal parent sow, which is the TN70. Now the TN70 is a cross between the Norwegian landrace and or the L line, and the large white, which is the Z line. So some of the traits which really stick out for this animal: she's a highly prolific animal giving birth to large litters. Second to that, she's also an incredibly good mother. She has a very good milking capacity. We call her the Holstein of the pigs, and we really see that on farm. And then what really makes this animal unique, even though she's a maternal line, she's extremely efficient. So she carries that, or she transfers that efficiency also to her offspring, making her bacon as efficient, or as efficient as she is. Just to give an indication of the breeding goal behind the TN70 that contributes to the traits of the TN70, there's 41 different traits included in her breeding goal. So 41 different traits is measured for the TN70. Now remember, this lies both in the L line and the Z line. And because she's a maternal line, there's a lot of focus on maternal traits, maternal ability, litter size, longevity. But because this animal still contributes 50% to the baconer, we also focus in the breeding goal on some finishing traits and robust survival. All right, then we have the TN Tempo. The TN Tempo is our terminal sire. This is a line developed from a large white, and this line is really focused on low-cost production. So this animal really excels in growth rate, good feed efficiencies, and is a really robust animal. So even though there's challenges on the farm, this animal will continue growing, continue eating, and survive to give you a lot of offspring at high weights. Just to give you an indication of the breeding goal of the TN Tempo, there's 33 traits included in this breeding goal. And as you can see, when you look at the different trait groups included in this breeding goal, a lot of focus here goes on finisher efficiency, finishing traits, carcass quality, meat quality, and survival. But because it's still the dam of this line still has to produce boars, so even in this breeding goal, we do give some weighting to litter size. Otherwise, you can end up with litters that only produce you 6 or 7 pigs, which is not going to be an efficient way of producing boars. All right, so then I want to share with you some trends, genetic trends that we have seen, some progress that's been made over the past years, and also look at the performance of these animals on commercial level. So first of all, the genetic potential of the TN70. So these are the newest figures that we produced, looking at what's been achieved over the past 5 years and making some predictions for the future. This is the production for the next 3 to 5 years that can be expected on the TN70. So as I mentioned, really giving birth to large litters, more than 16 piglets, pre-wean mortality below 11%. Many of our commercial farms are even running below 10% currently already. Despite the fact that she gives litters, large litters, birth weights are very decent on these litters. She's got a very good milking capacity, as I mentioned, so very decent weaning weights, 6.5 kilos at 21 days. And on the 28-day weaning farms, we see piglet weights exceeding 8 kilograms already. So, and then very prolific animal with 90+% farrowing rates. Then, as I mentioned, this animal also contributes to the baconer. So we also look at the production, or the finishing production. In the grower period, this animal has the capacity to grow over 1 kilo per day. So that's roughly between 30 and 120 kilos. Feed conversions below 2.5 and mortalities in that grower phase below 1.5%. All right, so when we look at the genetic trend of these animals over the past years, you'll see there's a light pink line at the bottom. That is the change that you've seen in the total number born over a 5-year period. This is cumulative, so that's not per year, but cumulative over a 5-year period. So that's around about a half a pig improvement in total number born. The pink line above that, the dark one, indicates the progress made in the live-born piglets. Now you see that is higher than the total number born, and that is because of the pressure that we put on reducing the number of stillbirths, which is the black line at the bottom. And then the grey line indicates the pressure that we put on reducing the pre-wean mortality, so more of the piglets that is born alive should survive, and that comes then together in the blue line, where we see almost a piglet more over a 5-year period being weaned on the TN70s. All right, then looking at some of the finishing traits on the TN70, in a 5-year period, growth rate, which is the pink line, about 80 grams per day improvement over that 5-year period, and about a 0.12 improvement in feed conversion. If we look at the same traits as these on the TN tempo, remember here we really focus on finishing traits. So if we consider what happened with daily gain over a 5-year period, about 120 grams of daily gain improvement over a 5-year period, and more than 0.25 improvement in the feed conversion. All right, then I want to share with you some reproduction performance. Now, this is not all our customer base. This is data from a national survey. So this just includes the farmers that actually participated in sending data for the survey. In 2021, this is the figures that the top 10 farms weaned per sow per year. So you can see all of these farms already exceeded 30.8 piglets weaned per sow per year in 2021. If we then look at the same survey data for the period 2022, you can see the improvement in weaned per sow per year on these farms, with the 10th position weaning already more than 31.5. Right, so this is the top 25% of our farms. In 2020, the top 25% did 30.2, in 2021, 31.4, and in 2022, 31.9. So you really see that improvement in the reproduction performance of these animals over time. All right, then when we look at some grower information, a bit more tricky to look at the grower information. Not everyone keeps track of this information equally well, but there are a number of farms that did send in the data. So first, when we look at the carcass weight, in 2022, all the farms that submitted data had an average carcass weight of 86 kilograms. Now, what I have to mention here is, with the improvements that we've seen in reproduction over time, we also see that a lot of the farms are producing more piglets than what they can actually carry in the weaner and grower facility, which means these buildings are really overstocked. So many of these farms already go at 19 or 20 weeks, and they start harvesting pigs, slaughtering them out as porkers, and then keeping what can be housed in the pens up until the 22-week slaughter weight. So when we look at that 86 kilogram, that includes that harvesting of the pigs as porkers already. When I look at, just to give you an indication of some of the figures of 2023, that figure is for a farm that doesn't do any harvesting, so they've got sufficient space to grow out their pigs, and they're doing a 92 kilogram carcass at 22 weeks. Right, then when we look at the kilogram salt per sow per year, so this is a combination then of the piglets, salt per sow per year, as well as the carcass weights. In 2022, the average was just above 2,500 kilograms per sow per year. So that's kilograms produced per one sow in a yearly basis. When I look at the figures of one of our producers for this year, if he can maintain his production and he can keep his weaning up and he can maintain his carcass weights, he will be able to achieve more than 2,900 kilograms per sow per year on his farm. Really tremendous what these animals can put out. Then when we look at survival, is also an important thing that I spoke about. Currently we have some farms who's achieving less than 10% losses from birth up to slaughter. So that includes pre-wean mortality, weaner mortality, grower mortality, losses after the animals are loaded to the slaughter plant, dead on arrivals, as well as condensed, which means in essence that more than 90% of the pigs that is born on the farm is actually sold, and value is being, or you get a value for that pig. All right, so this is all nice and good figures, but I think the question now is, how do we unlock the genetic potential of the animals? So the customer is central to a lot of services that can be given to the customer. I think one of the things that you should really dig into is making use of experts in different fields, whether it is from the genetic company, whether it is from a veterinarian who can assist with health management on the farm, a nutritionist who can help not just formulate diets, but also work out feeding programs, Also, you see there some meat scientists. When we really look at the integrated systems, also we from a topics Norseman side, can give some input from our meat science group in terms of how you can maximize the potential of the carcass in the slaughter plant and where some potential losses can be. So there's some inputs there. We have AI experts who can assist in looking at the correct timing and thing around the insemination area. So really relying on experts that can help you. They go around the field, they see what happens on other farms, what is done on other farms. They can give you advice in terms of what can be potentially improved. So that is really something that you should make use of. Then when I look at the TN70, there are some critical success factors for the TN70 as an animal. So we have young animals coming into the herd, and one of the most important things is to make sure that that young animal is set up correctly for lifetime performance. If you mess up your gilt and her performance starts below what it should be, she's never going to perform to her full potential. So when we look at the success factors of TN70, yield rearing is one of the first important factors. So that is really the development of that animal from birth up until the point of first insemination, ensuring that animal has good gradual growth rate, ensuring that the skeletal development of that animal is proper. Remember, this is a breeding animal. It's not a slaughter pig, so you have to consider the vitamin and mineral requirement, calcium to phosphorus ratios, ensure that you have a good quality gilt at first insemination. Maybe I'll go to this slide first. This is the insemination targets typically for the TN70. And you'll see there's a number of factors. It's not just achieving the correct weight or achieving the correct age. Ideally, all of these boxes need to be ticked. So this animal has to be developed so that she is inseminated above 150 kilograms. This is global guidelines. So in South Africa typically, and also in Africa, we see very, very quick growth rates on the animals. So we won't necessarily go to the 170 kilos. Also on the age bracket, most likely will be closer to the 110 days for insemination, not the 240s. Back fat is important to both sides. There's a bracket, a minimum and a maximum. If you don't have sufficient back fat reserves, it has a negative impact on reproduction. If you have too much back fat reserves, it becomes difficult to manage that condition of the animal later on in production. And then also the number of heats is important. You don't want to inseminate the animal the first time she comes on heat. You have to check all the boxes. All right, so after insemination, the gilt development is not done. The gilt still has to grow. It's a young animal. It has to achieve about between 220 and 240 kilograms at first farrowing. So there's still a lot of growth, depending on where you inseminate. If you inseminate at 150 kilos, there's still about 70, 80 kilograms of growth that needs to happen in that first gestation period. So that is really critical that she doesn't come underweight, because then you don't have the body weight to support that first litter. And the TN70 is an animal that really makes use of body weight. She doesn't just milk from her back fat, she milks also from body protein because she has such a high milking capacity. And then the last critical factor for her is then to also manage that first lactation, prevent excessive losses in that first lactation, which could lead to a negative effect on the second parity. So really look at supplying the animal with sufficient feed, sufficient nutrients based on the litter size that she has, so that she doesn't lose. Ideally, you want to lose around about 6% of maternal body weight. So after the litter weight is subtracted, maternal body weight is left, and not more than 6%, surely not going over 10% in that first lactation. After that, if you lose more than that, we do see a dip in second parity in conception, farrowing rates, as well as then the litter sizes. All right, so then there's some very general management things which we should never forget to tick the boxes as well. When we talk about feeding, I don't just talk about making sure that the animal has feed for the day. Through the different production stages of the animal, they have different requirements. And you have to make sure that when you feed an animal, you actually feed to her requirements. Also, raw material quality is something that you really need to check. Ensure that the raw materials that you use is of high quality. Consider things like mycotoxins and know what you're formulating for. You might think that you get a specific specification in your diet, but if your raw materials are substandard, you may end up with a diet which actually don't supply the nutrients the animals need. Water is the next thing. I think it's something which is sometimes undervaluated. Always ensure that animals, whether it is a sow, a grower, pig, or weaner, has free access to water, and that is a quality water, not just any water, but it has to be quality. Then housing and climate, you can talk a lot about what to manage there. I think one of the things that I want to mention there on the housing side is with improved production, we really need to ensure that you give the animals sufficient space. Whether we are looking at a farrowing crate where we are producing larger litters, the farrowing crate also needs to be adapted over time to ensure that you've got sufficient space in that crate for the increase in the litter size. Not just the litter size, but also the litter weights are increasing. And then climate control, bear in mind that the animal has an ideal thermoneutral zone. With the more modern genetics, that thermoneutral zone tends to decrease over time. And when you go to extremely cold weather or extremely hot weather, that can also have an effect on your production. So try and manage your buildings and your ventilation to get as close as possible to that optimal temperature. And bear in mind the age of the pigs, different ages, sows versus weaners versus growers, has different temperature requirements. Right, then there's key focus areas. Now, pig farming is not difficult. There are just a few select things that you need to do right in critical areas. So I'm going to break it up almost into the different production stages. The first one is the insemination. So I'm not going to go through everything you have to look at, but some of the key things that needs to happen here is flush feeding and bore stimulation. So that's flush feeding of your weaned pigs, also flush feeding of your replacement yolks. Ideally, you want to flush those animals 10 to 12 days before expected insemination. If you do proper flush feeding and bore stimulation, that helps with good heat signs, which again help with the second point, to identify when the animal is in heat and that you can identify the correct moment of insemination. Simply saying, oh, she's standing today, I must now inseminate, is not the right way. You should really pinpoint the correct time to inseminate that animal. If you inseminate too early or if you inseminate too late, that can negatively affect production. And then semen is critical. You can do everything right. Identify the right moment of insemination, but if you don't inseminate with quality semen, you will not get the results. So make sure that the cold chain of the semen is maintained from where it is produced up until the point where it is used. And then when you remove those sachets then to go and do the insemination, ensure that you don't expose them to extreme temperatures, expose them to sunlight. Oh, I'm just going to go inseminate once, so I'll put it in my back pocket and I just go and do that. Be mindful that you need to maintain the quality of that semen. Ideally, if you can, check the semen under the microscope to make sure that the quality is good before you inseminate. All right, then gestation. Gestation is a fairly simple period. There's not much that can, I want to say can go wrong, but that can go wrong. So in systems, we tend to move animals in gestation. Be mindful of when those animals are moved. If there's an insemination section and animals are moved after insemination to group housing or crates, the ideal time to do this movement is within 3 days after insemination. We don't want to move the animals between 3 and 28 days. That's where implantation happens and where you can really do damage by stressing the animals through movement. Also, you don't want to stress animals late in gestation where also you can do some damage. Then feeding here, again, it comes back to knowing what the requirements are. All I want to mention here is know that first, second, and third parities are still young animals which still have to grow. They're not just growing a litter, they're also growing their maternal weight. So be mindful of their requirements for maternal growth. And then also throughout the different phases, the requirements are different. In the first 28 to 35 days, sows that have been weaned have to recover their body conditions. So the requirements in that phase differs to the middle phase, where really you just have to maintain, or just have to feed for maintenance. And then again in the 90 plus phase, the requirements increase again when you have really growth of the litter and mammary development occurs. So you have to take that into consideration, not just say there's a flat curve, just feed that, she's got feed. Be mindful of what the requirements are throughout the different phases. All right, then lactation. So lactation, self-feeding is really important. In lactation, you're not just feeding, so you're feeding the sow so that she can lactate and she can feed her litter. But you're actually not just feeding the litter that's currently suckling on her, you're also feeding the next litter. Because as soon as she gives birth, and the uterus starts to recover and the oocytes for the next litter already starts to develop. So if you mess up in the lactation, you don't just mess up the litter that's currently there and that she's going to wean, you also do damage to the next litter, which is again why I mentioned, especially on first parity yields, make sure that you meet the requirements of these animals and they don't lose too much in that phase, because you do damage to the later or second parity litters as well. Then litter management with the TN70 especially, if you take care of the TN70, she will raise her pigs. You don't need to interfere too much, but you have to be mindful that every pig at least have to have teeth. So evaluate the udder of the sow, make sure how many functional teeth she has, and make sure that every piglet that you leave on her has a functional teeth. Where needed, move piglets to ensure that she has, or they have their own teeth. And then piglet feeding is not a massive focus because the sow is lactating and feeding the pigs. But the reason why I mention this is because this piglet has to be prepared for the weaning period. So during the lactation, the pig feeds on a liquid milk-based diet. After weaning, it goes to a solid diet. So throughout that lactation, you at least have to start to develop the gut for digesting the solid feed it will be given after weaning. So that just reduces the stress at that weaning phase. Then that is the production things. Something else which is really important, which can also go wrong, is vaccination programs. It is critical that you have a vaccination program for the farm. For high health farms, there's a standard vaccination program, which generally includes parvoleptum erysipelas and an E. coli vaccination. But depending on the health status of your farm, there might be other diseases you also need to vaccinate for. So it's critical that you set up with your veterinarian a specific vaccination program for your farm, and that you ensure that it is done at the correct times for the correct ages and classes of pigs. Again, with vaccinations, similar to your semen, make sure that you don't use expired vaccines, make sure that you keep the cold chain of that vaccine, and make sure that every animal gets the correct dose. If you are working with animals in a pen and you miss one animal, don't think, oh, she'll be okay. Make sure she gets a vaccination, because it can come back and bite you in the butt. All right, so if I can maybe just summarize everything, I think critical things to do when you have to, when you want to improve your production, is to have standard operating procedures on the farm, whether that is a vaccination process, whether that is a feeding program, or if it is an insemination protocol. Make sure that you document what needs to happen, and that the entire team who is involved in that specific process knows exactly how it should be done. Then consistency is key. If you consistently follow that program and you then collect data on specific performance areas, you can evaluate your process. If you don't follow a program consistently, and this person does it this way and that person does it that way, the data that you look at in evaluating your process is going to be useless. So have a process, be consistent, then you evaluate your process through data and performance data, and then you can make adjustments if and where needed. If everything works fine, there's no need to meddle where it's not needed. If the production is not exactly where you want it, then have a look at your system where you can make changes to improve the performance. Because ultimately, you can only manage what you measure on farm. Thank you.